New Beginnings. Written by Mr. 99 GTO. Edited and adapted for audio by Zephyr 4501. For better or for worse, railways are constantly rearranging and reshaping to try and provide a more cost-effective and efficient service to its customers. This was very true for the New South Wales Government Railways, as they were constantly developing their vast fleet of locomotives in the pursuit of greater performance. One class of locomotive that represented this better than any other was the C38 Class Pacific, the spearheads for the state's post-war image and the symbol of modernization and prosperity. The 38 class was built from 1943 to 1949. The first 5 members of the class were semi-streamlined with conical noses and centralized headlights, similar to that of the New Haven Railroad I-5 class Hudsons. The remainder of the class were non-streamlined, and the remaining members of the 30-strong class were built at Cardiff of Newcastle and Eveleigh in Sydney. This is where our story begins. The brilliant morning sun shone over the grimy brick structure of the finishing shed of the renowned Eveleigh Railway Workshops, the birthplace of many great locomotives. This particular morning was special, as sitting with her front end out of the shed's entrance was a brand new C38, her freshly applied verdant green livery shining brightly in the sun's rays. The new engine dozed peacefully, listening to the new strange sounds of rhythmic click-clacking and the puffing of passing locomotives. Suddenly, a new sound woke her up from her sleep, the sound of hissing steam and the metallic clunking of valve gear. She opened her eyes and looked straight ahead, as slowly easing towards her was a large black tank engine. Oh my word, I didn't mean to wake you up, my dear, the engine said apologetically. This engine had a tall, lipped funnel with large side tanks on either side of her boiler. Her paint was grimy and weathered, but her eyes shone brightly with energy and youth as she carefully buffered up to the new engine, smiling up to her as her fireman coupled the two together before he disappeared into the shed. It's quite all right, ma'am, the young engine stammered, blushing shyly as she looked down to her buffer beam. The old engine kept smiling to her warmly, remembering back to her first day all those many years ago. My name's Victoria, she said with a smile. What's your name, my dear? The 38 looked at the Baltic tank with a thoughtful look. Even though she had been awake during the finishing up of her construction when her boiler had been lowered onto her frames, the workmen hadn't really spoken to her much. And many of the other engines in the works, either going for repaints, maintenance, or overhauls, never really paid much attention to her either. She stayed quiet for a moment before finally saying softly, I haven't got a name, I mean, Victoria, apart from new engine. Victoria frowned, almost in a disgusted manner. Well, that's not going to do at all, she said sternly. We need to find you a suitable name. Then, the two heard some workmen along with Victoria's fireman talking near the shed entrance, discussing the fireman's newly born daughter. So, what you named her? Spoke the shed foreman. We named her after my grandmother. We named her Rose, the fireman responded with a big grin. Victoria's eyes widened and a smile spread across her face. It was so wide that it nearly went buffer to buffer as an idea struck her in the funnel. That's a perfect name! Rose! Victoria cheered. The 38 smiled a bit more as she gazed at the old engine. That sounds like a lovely name, she said with a little giggle, blushing shyly again. It's fitting too, given the blush on your cheeks, Victoria said with a smirk. The two engines looked down at Victoria's fireman, who had finished his talk with the workman. He smiled warmly before turning to Victoria. Come on, old girl. I better get her back to the depot. Victoria chuckled excitedly as her fireman made his way back to her cab and climbed aboard. With jets of steam coming from her cylinder drain cocks, Victoria started to pull. She had had a little difficulty at first due to the slippery rails underneath her, but eventually, her and Rose started to move. Rose shuddered as her newly built motion started to turn for the first time. Secretly, she thought the sensation of running over points to be rather unpleasant. Permanent way gangs and other engines watched on with interest as the new engine was towed through the yards with a barking tank engine in front. It wasn't too long before they reached a huge, strange-looking building. Rose's jaw dropped to her buffer beam as they got closer. This place was full of engines of all shapes and sizes, from small 060s to an engine with a massive tender poking out of the building. Victoria smiled, bringing her to a halt just outside the depot's entrance. Her fireman came round to uncouple the two engines. "Welcome to your new home, Rose. This is Enfield, the main locomotive depot for Sydney," Victoria said with a hint of pride in her voice. Rose looked curiously down at the Baltic tank. "Where are you going, Victoria?" Rose asked, watching her fireman return to her cab before looking back to the tank engine. "I need to head back to the yards," she explained. "I have work to do, and I have an express train to put together soon. I will be back later on tonight, so you won't miss me." She smiled as her drain cocks opened again, backing away from the 38. Rose watched her reverse away before departing the sheds. She didn't wait long before an engine buffered up behind her and guided her into the shed. After being turned around, the shunting engine guided her into the berth next to a sleeping goods engine. Rose sat there quietly, looking around the sheds at all the relatively empty berths. The few engines in there were asleep or otherwise engaged in conversation. But despite this, Rose couldn't help but smile, closing her eyes to doze off back to sleep and contentment. Though, unforeseen to her, sitting just opposite the dark of the shed and glaring coldly at her, was one of the older express engines, one with a grudge and a bad attitude. "You have to be kidding. Another one of these newfangled Pacifics. Why does the railway keep building them when they already have more than capable express engines? No doubt she'll take my place and relegate me to goods. Well, not on my railway she won't."